Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Global Gaze, where we talk art, film, and books from a global perspective. I'm your host, Dr. SarahJilani. I'm an academic, a freelance arts writer, and a lifelong third culture kid. One of the most fundamental functions of literature, in my view, is how it expands our horizons. It develops our capacities for empathy through putting us in other people's shoes. When we have the chance to explore how stories travel across borders, languages, and identities, I believe that we ourselves expand as human beings. So today, I'd like to recommend you 5 novels that don't just take you around different countries, but they actually immerse the reader into the lived experience and textures of the cities that many people call home. So while this will be a little bit of armchair traveling, the books that I'm about to talk about are not just for purposes of sightseeing. Each in their own ways are about memory, migration, longing, and joy. They show us how history lingers in streets, skylines, and in personal relationships. Now, this is just a tiny selection, taken mostly from the mid-20th century to the present day. These 5 novels will take us to the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. They all demonstrate what we sometimes in literary studies call the city as character trope. That's basically when the writer writes place in such an evocative way that the city or town or location that the story takes place itself becomes a kind of character. It becomes almost anthropomorphic. Now, the reason I love this trope in particular, as somebody who studies, teaches, and enjoys post-colonial literatures, is because traveling and tourism in our world today is not an equal endeavor. There are countless examples of both ecological destruction and social destruction tied to over-tourism. So while I'm not saying don't travel, what I am saying is literature is a wonderful way to expand one's horizons without always resorting to practices that could sometimes have harmful effects. So let's get started. Our first stop is Port of Spain. This is the capital of the small island nation in the Caribbean of Trinidad and Tobago. The author V.S. Naipaul, in his 1959 novel Miguel Street, captures this setting in a patchwork of stories and characters. The novel is set a little bit earlier than 59, during the Second World War, where Naipaul shows us that Port of Spain was actually used as an American military base during World War II. But he doesn't focus too much on these big macroeconomic and political happenings. Instead, he chooses to tell the story of one particular neighborhood through the eyes of our protagonist, who is kind of the author himself, growing from boyhood to man. We meet a host of unforgettable, comedic, and sometimes tragic characters. There's Bogart, named after the actor Humphrey Bogart, who disappears mysteriously for months at a time. There's B. Wordsworth, a poet who has never written a poem. And there's the narrator himself, whose coming of age is bound up with the contradictions of Caribbean life in the mid-20th century. But Naipaul in Miguel Street gives us more than just comedy. He gives us a sense of all of the ways in which ordinary life is wrapped up with the bigger historical shifts that happen in a given place. These characters' lives are determined by a complex legacy of the British Empire, aspiration, displacement, hybridity, and many other factors that don't get explicitly named in the book, but are always kind of humming away in the background, making Port of Spain what it is in the story. Next, we travel to Accra, the capital of Ghana. In the 1991 novel Changes, a Love Story, Aidoo gives us an unforgettable protagonist. She tells the story of Essie, a young, educated Ghanaian woman who is quite career-driven, but then she comes to a shocking decision. She decides to leave her husband and enter into a polygamous marriage. Aidoo's Accra is the backdrop to this interpersonal tale of one woman trying to navigate the city in her own way and on her own terms. It's a place where colonial economic hangovers, new approaches to living, and traditional patriarchal models collide. The novel captures the intimate, difficult, and sometimes painful decisions that women must come to as they navigate living in a post-colonial metropolis. From Accra, we move to Istanbul, Turkey, sprawling, ancient, and ever-changing. Now, the Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk's books all are set in Turkey and very often in Istanbul, one way or another. He's better known for Snow, which won him the Nobel Prize, but I'd like to recommend the 2014 novel A Strangeness in My Mind. In it, Pamuk tells the story of a poor street vendor who wanders the city for decades, from around the 1990s to the mid-2010s. He observes and reflects as the Istanbul that he first arrived to as a young migrant from rural Anatolia changes almost beyond his comprehension. The protagonist isn't a powerful or wealthy man, but through him, we observe the changes that overtake the city, the tensions in development, and the rise of new political movements. It's transporting and meditative, and it reminds us the only constant, especially in cosmopolitan cities, is change. Next up is another island nation in the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda. And Jamaica Kincaid's 1988 novel, A Small Place, is set in the capital of Antigua, where she grew up. Now, A Small Place has more often been called a kind of polemical nonfiction essay, but I do also think there's so many elements to it that make it a short novel or novella. It delivers a deep critique of tourism as a kind of neo-colonialism. She takes the reader on a typical Caribbean island resort holiday, but she asks us to reflect at each point how this tourism industry is actually felt and lived by locals. In A Small Place, part of what makes it so effective is that Kincaid uses second-person narration, something not very common. This allows Kincaid to speak directly to the reader, sometimes in an accusatory tone, making us quite uncomfortable but also absolutely hooked. She explores the legacies of British colonialism in Antigua and how the tourism industry continues to enforce a kind of economic and cultural dependency that can essentially be considered a continuation of this colonial history. This is not a comfortable read, even though it's short, but I think it's absolutely vital. It helps us understand how globalization today, in many ways, is a continuation of the unjust conditions of the past. And finally, we arrive in Karachi, Pakistan. Kamila Shamsie's novel Cartography is, on the surface, a love story. But it's also a story about the fragmented memories of the partition of South Asia in 1947. It captures how migration and loss can live on in generations that did not actually experience them firsthand. And as a result, how cities can carry some of these traumas that even the characters may not explicitly talk about. Shamsie touches on all of these themes subtly through her two characters, Raheen and Karim, who are childhood friends growing up together in 1990s Karachi. And Karachi here isn't just the setting, it is almost like an antagonist and protagonist in one. So it's actually a perfect embodiment of that trope I mentioned earlier, the city as character idea. Karachi really does become almost a third character in this novel, at once chaotic, beautiful, brutal, and full of contradictions. In cartography, the city remembers everything, even when its people try to forget. So there you have it, 5 novels, 5 places, and 5 different ways of seeing the world. The way these stories treat these 5 places is very different from a romantic or touristy view. Instead, they show us how history is built into streets and sidewalks, how memory and erasure live together in urban corners, and how migration histories are a normal part and parcel of almost every place in the world. Like I mentioned, this is just a tiny selection, but if you're looking to expand your reading list and you're looking to be transported away to maybe parts of the world that you haven't been able to travel to yet, then these are a great place to start. Let me know in the comments if you have a story, could be a novel, could be a film, that really took you to the place that it was set in. That's it from me from now. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on your notifications so you can see any of my new videos show up directly on your feed. Thank you so much for watching, and keep your gaze global.